The courtroom was packed. Whispers echoed like a low thunder across the wooden benches as a man stepped inside, boots scuffed from years of labor, denim shirt faded from sun and sweat. His hands, calloused and trembling, clutched a wrinkled file of papers. Some smirked, others scoffed. But Raymond Joe didn't look up. He walked with the quiet dignity of someone who had buried pain deeper than most had ever dared to feel. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't a scholar. He was just a father. And yet, today, he was about to stand before a judge to speak on behalf of his only son. Billy Joe, a young man accused of a crime he swore he didn't commit. A boy who, to Raymond, was still the child that used to fall asleep in his arms after long days in the field. Now that child sat behind bars, pale and silent, his future balancing on a fragile edge. Raymond approached the bench. The judge raised an eyebrow. The prosecutor leaned back, amused. A murmur of laughter rose when Raymond began to speak, not because of what he said, but because of how he looked. But what none of them knew was this. This humble man, mocked for his clothes, dismissed for his silence, was about to shake the very foundation of that courtroom. Before the gavel fell, truth would rise. Stay with us through this powerful story of injustice, courage, and unexpected redemption. What you're about to witness isn't just a fight for a son, it's a reminder that appearances deceive, but character prevails. Subscribe now and join us on this emotional journey that proves, when the world turns its back, a father stands firm. Willow Creek was the kind of town where the rhythm of life moved slowly. Tractors hummed down dirt roads, neighbors waved from porches, and everyone knew each other's story. But even in a place like this, stories could twist, and truths could be buried beneath whispers and assumptions. It was just past dusk when the sheriff's cruiser pulled up to the Joe family farm. The sky was a burnt orange and the cicadas buzzed in the heat. Billy Joe had been in the barn fixing the hinge on the goat pen. He looked up, puzzled, when the headlights bathed him in white. "Billy Joe!" called Deputy Simmons as he stepped out, hand resting on his holster. "Yes, sir?" Billy wiped his hands on his jeans, confused. "You're under arrest for burglary and vandalism at Granger's Hardware," Simmons said without hesitation, reading him his rights as two more deputies came up from behind. Billy blinked. "What? I haven't left the farm all day. Ask anyone." "Save it for the judge," Simmons cut him off. "We got a witness and your name on a police report." "Let's go." Raymond Joe had just returned from the general store when he saw the patrol cars disappearing down the road, his son in the back seat. His heart stopped cold. He dropped the sack of feed and ran inside, grabbed his keys, and took the old pickup truck down to the station. When he arrived, the officers didn't look up. At the desk, the sergeant spoke without glancing over. "Visiting hours are over." "I ain't visiting," Raymond said firmly. "I'm his father. I want to know why my boy's in a cell." Sergeant Myers finally looked up and smirked. "Dress code's a little loose today, huh?" Raymond ignored the jab. "I want answers." After an hour of waiting and being passed between officers, a copy of the report was slapped onto the counter. According to it, Billy had been seen near Granger's Hardware that morning. A young clerk claimed he recognized him fleeing the scene with a crowbar. Tools were missing. Windows were broken. Raymond shook his head. "That ain't right. He was here all day. He fixed the fence, repaired the tractor, asked the neighbors, they saw him." But no one was listening. Billy was being held without bail. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 days later. Raymond drove home, fists clenched on the steering wheel. He had seen men like the prosecutor in this town, proud, sharp suits, fast to judge, and he had seen what happened to folks who looked like him. Dirt under the nails, no college degree, no connections. The next morning, Raymond sat on the porch holding a Bible in one hand and Billy's childhood photo in the other. His son didn't deserve this, and Raymond knew, deep in his bones, that no one else was going to fight for him. Not the system, not the judge, not even the lawyer the court might assign at the last minute. He was alone, but he wasn't going to give up. "I don't care if they laugh," he said aloud to no one but God. "They're gonna hear me." Over the next 2 days, Raymond gathered everything he could. Receipts from the co-op proving they'd been home, written statements from neighbors, even a timeline he drew out by hand. He didn't have a computer. He didn't have fancy words, but he had the truth, and he had love. On the morning of the hearing, he put on his cleanest shirt, still stained from years of toil, and polished his boots the best he could. As he looked in the mirror, he saw not a defeated man, but a father on a mission. At the courthouse, people stared. His clothes were out of place, his hands visibly trembling, but his eyes, they burned with resolve. Billy was brought in through a side door, chains on his ankles. He looked up and saw his father sitting alone in the front row. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Strength. Raymond stood as the judge entered, ready to be heard. And so, the battle began. The courtroom was colder than it needed to be, lit by fluorescent lights that made every floor feel more visible. Raymond Joe sat stiffly at the plaintiff's table, his papers organized into a neat stack on a manila folder. His hands, rough, sun-weathered, gripped the sides of the table as if the entire weight of his son's future depended on that moment. And in truth, it did. The judge, Walter H. Dixon, entered with an expression carved in stone. His reputation was known far and wide. Strict, impatient, and unimpressed by theatrics. A man who valued order above all, and who, from the moment he laid eyes on Raymond, clearly saw a disruption. "All rise," the bailiff called, and the courtroom stood. Raymond rose slowly, nodding respectfully. His worn boots made a hollow sound against the polished floor as he stepped forward when summoned. Dixon narrowed his eyes. "You are Mr. Raymond Joe?" the judge asked, almost uncertainly, as if surprised this man would dare represent anyone in his courtroom. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm here to speak for my son." "No legal counsel?" Dixon frowned. "This is a serious charge, Mr. Joe. Your son is facing potential prison time." "I understand, sir," Raymond replied, voice calm. "But I know my boy, and I know he didn't do what they say." There was a faint chuckle from the other side of the courtroom. Enter Harold White, the county's head prosecutor, slick as oil and twice as cold. He wore an expensive navy suit and a smug expression, arms crossed as he looked Raymond up and down. "Objection, Your Honor," White said, barely hiding his disdain. "This man is not a lawyer. He's not qualified to speak in this hearing." Judge Dixon looked at Raymond again, as if evaluating whether the prosecutor was right. Raymond stood straighter. "I ain't a lawyer, no sir, I'm a father, and I got the right to speak for my son if no one else will." The judge exhaled slowly. "Very well. But this will be brief. Mr. Joe, proceed." Raymond stepped forward, pulling a sheet of paper from his folder. "I've got statements from our neighbors saying Billy was home all day. I've got receipts from the co-op, timestamps from the gas station. He didn't leave the farm, not once." He laid the papers on the table before the judge. His hands shook just slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing every word mattered. Harold White approached the bench lazily, hands in his pockets. "Your Honor, this is hearsay. Handwritten notes and receipts. This isn't evidence. This is sentiment." He turned to the room. "With all due respect, this man is dressed like he just came from fixing a tractor. Are we really going to entertain this as a legal defense?" Laughter broke out. Not loud, but enough. Raymond didn't move. His eyes stayed on the judge. "I didn't come here to be judged by my clothes. I came to speak truth." Judge Dixon paused, tapping his pen against the desk. Then he leaned forward, examining the stack of papers. "Some of these documents do appear to support a timeline," he said slowly. "But without corroborating testimony or legal guidance, they carry limited weight." Raymond nodded. "Then let me bring folks in. Give me a chance to show you who my boy is." White sighed. "Your Honor, this is turning into a performance." Dixon silenced him with a look. "I'll allow Mr. Joe until Friday to submit a formal request for character witnesses," the judge said. "But that's the extent of my leniency. This is a court of law, not a family gathering." Raymond bowed his head respectfully. "Thank you, sir." As the court adjourned, Raymond stepped out into the hallway, his shoulders tight, his heart still pounding. People walked past him without a glance, as if he were invisible, but someone had been watching. From the back row, a young woman stood up, tidy, composed, and curious. Her name was Clara Evans, and though Raymond didn't know it yet, she was about to change everything. The courthouse steps creaked beneath Raymond's boots as he stepped into the sunlight, shielding his eyes. The hearing had left a bitter taste in his mouth. Not because the judge was harsh, but because everything he'd said, everything he'd brought, had been treated like it came from a man who didn't belong. He stood alone for a moment, watching as people in suits and dresses passed him without notice, but one pair of eyes had stayed on him longer than the rest. "Excuse me," a voice called softly. Raymond turned. A young woman in a pale blue blouse and charcoal blazer approached, holding a leather notebook. She looked out of place among the older, stiffer officials, younger, sharper, and yet strangely calm. "I'm sorry if I'm intruding. My name's Clara Evans," she said, offering her hand. Raymond hesitated before shaking it. "You were in the back row," she smiled. "I was observing court procedures for my final practicum. I'm a law student, well, almost a graduate." Raymond looked skeptical. "You work for the court?" "No," she said, laughing softly. "Just trying to learn how justice is supposed to work." He started to turn away, but she stepped beside him. "Mr. Joe, I saw how they treated you in there. I also saw you brought more evidence than most defendants with full legal teams." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "Didn't do me much good, did it?" Clara opened her notebook and flipped to a page. "You mentioned timestamps from the gas station. Which one?" "Billy filled the truck at Earl's Shell on Tuesday morning," he said. "I still got the receipt. Said he'd top it off 'cause we were low." Clara nodded quickly, scribbling. "Do you know if they have surveillance cameras?" Raymond blinked. "Probably. Earl's always talking about people stealing gum." She looked up at him. "If I can get the footage, we might have proof that Billy couldn't have been near Granger's hardware at the time of the break-in." Raymond stared at her for a long moment. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me." "I know what it feels like to be underestimated," Clara said simply, "and I don't like bullies." Raymond hesitated. "You really think it'll make a difference?" Clara closed her notebook. "If I can find something solid, I'll present it to someone who'll listen." They shook hands again, this time with a little more certainty. That afternoon, Clara drove to Earl's Shell and spoke to the grizzled old owner who vaguely remembered Billy. "Nice kid," Earl muttered as he fiddled with the register. "Always polite. Pays in cash." "Did your security system catch him here Tuesday morning?" Clara asked. Earl rubbed his chin. "Probably. We don't delete nothing for a week." She leaned forward. "Can I see it?" 30 minutes later, Clara sat in the back room watching grainy footage on a dusty monitor. And there he was, Billy Joe, filling up his truck at 9:48 a.m., sipping soda and laughing with Earl. The hardware store break-in had happened at 9:15 a.m., 15 miles away. Her heart jumped. This was more than doubt. This was a timeline, and it didn't match the prosecution's story. She burned a copy to a USB stick and left with a plan forming. Meanwhile, Raymond sat on the porch that night, a lantern buzzing beside him. He hadn't told anyone about the girl yet. Maybe it was foolish to hope. Maybe it was nothing. But deep inside, something felt different this time. He didn't know Clara Evans, but when she looked at him, she didn't see a worn-out farmer in old boots. She saw a father, and that was enough. Clara didn't sleep much that night. She was already drafting a motion in her notebook. Even if she couldn't submit it herself, she needed someone who could. She picked up her phone and hesitated. Then, finally, she called a number she'd been avoiding for years. "Mom, I need to talk. It's about a case." The next morning brought heavy skies. Clouds hung low over Willow Creek, casting the Joe farmhouse in a grey stillness. Raymond sat at the kitchen table, a mug of black coffee cooling in front of him. He hadn't slept. His body was still, but his mind turned in circles, thinking of Billy, of the courtroom, of that young woman named Clara who'd spoken with such conviction. He ran a hand through his thinning hair and opened the small wooden box beside him. Inside were fragments of another life, folded letters, a gold wedding band, a laminated photo of Billy on his 6th birthday, holding a model airplane. Beneath them all, tucked away, was a card. Raymond Joe, head librarian, Willow Creek County Library. The title felt foreign now. There was a time when Raymond wore slacks and a tie, helping schoolchildren find books, teaching senior citizens to use the internet. Then came the drought. One long summer scorched the land, drained the reservoirs, and emptied the town's pockets. The library's funding dried up. Raymond lost his job. His wife, already sick, passed away not long after. Medical bills piled high, and the house nearly went with them. The farm became survival. Books became firewood. Pride became silence. Billy had grown up too fast. He dropped out of school to help with the crops, never once complained, never once blamed his father for the hand life had dealt them. He was a good boy, the kind who prayed before meals and helped old Miss Langley with her groceries without being asked. And now he was sitting in a cold cell, waiting for a world that didn't care to see the truth. A knock came at the door. Raymond opened it to find Clara, a coat over her arm and a determined look in her eyes. "I have the footage," she said. "It shows Billy at Earl's, minutes after the break-in supposedly happened, and I spoke to the clerk who gave the statement against him. Turns out, he's dating the niece of the prosecutor." Raymond blinked. "You serious?" She nodded. "There's something off about this case, and I think Harold White knows it." He stepped aside to let her in. Clara laid her notebook and USB stick on the table, then looked around the modest kitchen. The wallpaper was peeling near the sink. A jar of nails sat beside a stack of unpaid bills, but the place felt solid, not broken, just worn. "You built this place yourself?" she asked. Raymond nodded. "Started it with my wife. She passed 5 years ago. Billy and I kept it going." Clara sat across from him. "You were a librarian once?" He raised an eyebrow. "I saw your name on an old county newsletter," she said, smiling. "You hosted story time on Saturdays." Raymond chuckled. "Had kids crawling all over me. Never thought I'd miss the noise." Clara leaned forward. "You're not what they see in court. You're a father, a teacher, a fighter. We can't let them bulldoze over you because of a shirt and boots." He looked at her for a long moment, something flickering in his eyes. "I tried asking the court to let me call witnesses. Judge said I had till Friday, but I don't even know how to file that stuff." "I do," Clara said quickly. "And I know someone who might listen." Raymond tilted his head. "My mom. She's a retired judge, Eleanor Evans. She taught me how to recognize injustice. She's not fond of Harold White either." Raymond grunted. "And you think she'll care about some farmer and his boy?" "She'll care if I make her," Clara said, standing. "And I will." Raymond stood too. "Why are you helping us like this?" Clara looked at him, steady and unflinching. "Because the world needs to be reminded that truth doesn't always wear a suit." Clara sat in the passenger seat of her mother's Buick, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her purse. Judge Eleanor Evans, poised behind the wheel, glanced sideways with the same analytical sharpness she used from the bench for over 3 decades. "You're unusually quiet," Eleanor said, steering them through Willow Creek's narrow main street, "for someone who demanded to meet me in person and insisted I hear her out before brushing it off." Clara took a breath. "It's about a boy named Billy Joe, and his father, Raymond. He's representing his son alone. No attorney, no money. Just a heart full of fire." "I read the court schedule," Eleanor replied. "Burglary and property damage, standard juvenile hearing." "It's not standard," Clara insisted. "The boy didn't do it, and the father's trying to prove it, but no one's listening because he looks like he just came from the fields." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Appearances don't belong in a courtroom." "But they often fill the room before evidence does." "Exactly," Clara said, sitting forward. "He has receipts, timelines, footage, even neighbors willing to testify, but the judge gave him until Friday to make it all official, and he doesn't even know where to begin." Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She pulled into a parking spot in front of the courthouse and cut the engine. "Let me see the footage." Later that day, Raymond stood on the porch, watching a dust cloud rise from the road as a car approached. Clara stepped out first, holding a folder tight. Behind her, Eleanor Evans emerged, her gray coat billowing like a judge's robe even without the bench. "Mr. Joe," Eleanor said, extending a hand. "Clara tells me you've been trying to build a case," Raymond nodded, cautious. Trying don't mean much if nobody listens. Then let's change that, Eleanor replied, her voice calm, but edged with resolve. At the kitchen table, Clara plugged in the USB stick and showed Eleanor the grainy footage. Raymond watched as the timestamp blinked 9:48 a.m. Billy filling up the truck, clearly nowhere near the crime scene 15 minutes earlier. Did the defense present this in court? Eleanor asked. No lawyer, Raymond muttered. Just me. And this young clerk who testified against Billy, do you have a statement from him? She asked. Clara handed her a printout. He's recanted off the record, but he won't speak publicly. His uncle is Harold White. Eleanor closed the folder slowly. That complicates things. But it proves bias, Clara said, and misconduct. Raymond leaned forward. You think we got a shot? Eleanor looked at him, her expression unreadable. You have more than most who walk in unrepresented, but the court doesn't run on heart, Mr. Joe. It runs on paper, signatures, procedures. We need to prepare a formal motion, secure testimony from neighbors, and file all of it by Friday morning. Raymond's eyes dropped to his hands. Don't know how to write them kinds of papers. You don't have to, Eleanor said firmly. You have Clara, and now you have me, unofficially, of course. Over the next 2 days, their kitchen became a war room. Clara typed furiously as Raymond dictated details, exact times, dates, conversations, and the names of people who saw Billy that day. Eleanor coached them both on formatting affidavits and preparing evidence indexes. Raymond's neighbors signed statements confirming Billy's presence on the farm throughout the morning of the alleged crime. Earl, the gas station owner, agreed to testify if called. Even Miss Langley, nearly blind and 82 years old, signed a letter confirming Billy helped her carry groceries at 10 a.m. that same day. By Thursday night, the folder on Clara's laptop was bursting with properly labeled documents, formatted for the court. Raymond watched them work, a mix of gratitude and disbelief rising in his chest. He didn't know what would happen on Friday. But for the first time, he didn't feel alone. Friday morning came draped in fog. Willow Creek was unusually silent, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Raymond stood outside the courthouse, freshly shaved, wearing the same pressed shirt and polished boots he had worn on the day of the first hearing. Not out of vanity, but conviction. His son's freedom deserved his very best. Clara walked beside him, holding the neatly compiled motion in a firm grip. Behind them, Eleanor Evans moved slowly, but with purpose. Though technically retired, her presence carried a weight that made even the courthouse guards nod respectfully. Inside, the clerk glanced at the folder with disinterest. Filing deadline was 20 minutes ago. Clara pointed to the clock on the wall. It's 8:42. We were told we had until 9, the clerk shrugged. Judge Dixon's in a mood today, said he's moving the docket up. Clara leaned in. This isn't just paper, it's a boy's life. The clerk rolled his eyes but took the documents. I'll get them stamped. Raymond exhaled as if he'd been holding his breath since dawn, but inside the courtroom, trouble was already brewing. Judge Dixon entered with a scowl etched deep on his face. Mr. Joe, he said, voice echoing, I reviewed your last request. I saw your new submission. Unfortunately, it appears you were not properly advised on format. Several pages are inadmissible due to irregular formatting. Clara stood. Your Honor, if I may... You may not, Dixon snapped. So you are not representing counsel, but the evidence is irrelevant if not submitted through proper channels, Dixon said flatly. This is a court of law, not a community board. Raymond stood slowly, holding back anger. With all respect, sir, this ain't about paper sizes or staples. This is about my boy, about the truth. Harold White rose from his seat, smirking. Your Honor, it's clear the defense has no formal strategy. I suggest we proceed to trial. I'm confident the state can prove its case. Clara's jaw clenched. You know this is wrong. White leaned closer to her. And you know how many careers have ended from pushing too hard. She stared at him, not backing down. Dixon pounded the gavel. Enough. This case will proceed to jury selection next week. No more delays. Raymond's shoulders dropped. The momentum they'd built, gone in seconds. He turned to Clara, voice low. "Was it all for nothing?" "No," she said. "Not yet." Outside, the air was heavy. Raymond sat on the courthouse steps, head in his hands. Clara paced in front of him, her fury barely contained. "They dismissed the witness statements," she muttered. "The footage. Everything. All on technicalities. Guess folks like us were never meant to win in places like that," Raymond said quietly. "No," Clara snapped. "Don't say that." He looked up, tired but not broken. "I can feel it, Clara. They don't want the truth. They want a story that's easy to swallow. Poor kid, no alibi. Poor father, no education. Guilty, case closed." Clara shook her head. "We're not done. I'm going to speak to someone else." "Who?" She hesitated. "The press." Raymond's eyes widened. "You think that'll help?" "Public pressure changes things," she said. "They're ignoring you because no one's watching. If people were watching, they'd have to care." Raymond looked past her out toward the town square. "You really believe one voice can do that?" Clara nodded. "I believe yours can." That night, Raymond sat on the edge of Billy's empty bed, holding his son's worn-out baseball cap. He thought of every field they'd worked, every hardship they'd survived, and he thought of what Billy had said the last time they spoke through the glass. "Don't let them bury me, Pa." He wouldn't, not without a fight. Monday morning arrived with an eerie stillness in the air, as if even the wind was waiting to see what would happen next. Raymond buttoned his shirt slowly, his hands steady despite the storm he knew awaited him. The courtroom would be packed today. Clara's article in the Willow Creek Gazette had hit shelves Saturday morning with the headline, "A Father's Voice Ignored. Is Justice Still Blind in Our Town?" It had spread faster than either of them expected. By the time they arrived at the courthouse steps, Raymond and Clara were greeted by a small crowd. Neighbors, local pastors, shopkeepers, even Earl from the gas station had come. Not all said anything, but they stood with him. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with quiet energy. Judge Dixon looked notably less composed than usual, clearly aware of the shift in public attention. Harold White sat stiffly, jaw tight, no longer smirking. "Mr. Joe," Dixon said, opening the session, "you've requested to speak again. This court has allowed it, under review. But be brief." Raymond rose slowly. He didn't have a prepared speech, just truth. He stepped toward the front, looked at the judge, then turned to the gallery. "My name is Raymond Joe," he began, voice clear. "I ain't got a law degree, and I ain't rich. What I do have is a son. A boy I raised with everything I had, even when that wasn't much." He glanced at Billy, who sat behind the glass, watching through tired eyes. "People look at me and see a man who don't belong in a courtroom. Maybe they're right, but I'm here anyway, because my son is sitting in a cell for something he didn't do. And I ain't just gonna stand by while they take the rest of his life." Murmurs rose, but Raymond continued. "I brought receipts, statements, even a video showing he couldn't have been where they said he was. But every time I spoke, I was told my shirt was too wrinkled, my words too simple, my case too messy." He paused. "But justice ain't supposed to be tidy. It ain't supposed to belong to just one kind of person. It's supposed to be for everyone." He turned back to Judge Dixon. "You said this court ain't a family gathering, but when a father's fighting for his son, it is family, whether you like it or not." The room was silent. Even Harold White seemed to falter. Raymond took one last breath. "You can call me poor, call me simple, but don't call me a liar. My son is innocent, and if this court don't see that, maybe it's the court that needs to change and not me." He stepped back, his shoulders straighter than they had been in weeks. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Judge Dixon cleared his throat. "This court acknowledges Mr. Joe's statement. Due to new public interest and concerns of procedural bias, we will delay jury selection for further review of submitted evidence." A ripple of approval passed through the gallery. Raymond sat, barely believing what he'd heard. Clara touched his arm, a proud smile breaking across her face. Harold White stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular," Dixon interrupted. "So is suppressing exculpatory evidence, Mr. White. Sit down." The courtroom doors swung open as more townspeople entered, some holding signs that read, Let the truth speak. Raymond had not asked for them to come, but they came anyway, because his voice had broken through. And now people were listening. The courtroom felt different now. The tension that once pressed down like a weight had shifted. It was still heavy, but now it carried anticipation. Clara sat beside Raymond, her notebook in hand, eyes locked on the door as Judge Dixon reviewed documents in silence. Suddenly, the side doors opened. A bailiff escorted Earl Thompson, the gas station owner, to the stand. Earl adjusted his cap nervously and cleared his throat. "For you've been asked to testify about the morning of the alleged break-in at Granger's Hardware," Dixon said. "Please state what you witnessed." Earl glanced at Raymond, then back to the judge. "Billy Joe came by my station at exactly 9:48 a.m. He filled up the truck, paid cash, and stuck around talking for a few minutes. I got security footage and the receipt to prove it." He held up a printed screenshot and the original transaction log. Dixon leaned forward, inspecting it with more interest than he'd shown in the entire case until now. "And where is your station located?" the judge asked. 15 miles outside town. Took Billy at least 20 minutes to get there." Clara stood. "Your Honor, that would mean Billy couldn't have been at Granger's Hardware at 9:15, the time the crime occurred." Harold White shifted uncomfortably, but didn't speak. Dixon nodded slowly. "Very well. This contradicts the original timeline provided by the prosecution. Is there more?" Clara took a breath. "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to submit a sworn statement from Tommy Rivera, the young man who originally claimed to see Billy at the scene." "Tommy's not present?" "No, sir. He's currently out of town visiting his grandmother in Baton Rouge, but I contacted him by video. His statement was notarized remotely. He admits he was pressured into naming Billy Joe by Harold White himself." The room gasped. White stood abruptly. "That's outrageous hearsay. This is an attack on the state's integrity." Dixon raised a hand. "Mr. White, sit down." Raymond stared, stunned, as Clara handed over the document. Judge Dixon read through the notarized statement, his eyes tightening with each line. "According to this," he said aloud, "Mr. Rivera was told to identify Billy Joe or risk complications with his own probation." "That's what he told me," Clara said, calm but firm. "He was manipulated." The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. "This court takes such accusations with utmost seriousness. I'll be forwarding this to the State Ethics Board for investigation." White's face had gone pale. Dixon continued, his voice now colder. "Due to these developments and the overwhelming doubt cast on the prosecution's case, I am vacating all charges against Billy Joe, effective immediately." A collective gasp filled the room, then silence, then a sudden wave of cheers. Raymond stood frozen. Clara squeezed his hand, but he didn't move. Not yet. Not until he saw him. Moments later, Billy Joe was led into the courtroom, still in his holding clothes, his wrists now free of shackles. When he saw his father, he stopped. Raymond crossed the room without hesitation and wrapped Billy in his arms. The room fell silent again, not out of respect for the court, but for the sacredness of that embrace. A father and son, bruised by injustice, finally standing in the light of vindication. Outside, cameras flashed as word spread. Reporters swarmed. But Raymond didn't notice them. He only saw Billy, safe and beside him again. Judge Dixon stood to leave, but not before turning to Raymond. "Mr. Joe, this court owes you an apology. Not for the procedures, but for the way you were dismissed." Raymond met his eyes. "It ain't the apology that matters, Judge. It's the fact you finally listened." The judge nodded once and walked out. Later, as the sun dipped behind the courthouse, Clara, Raymond and Billy sat on the steps watching the crowd disperse. "You did it, Pa," Billy said, voice hoarse. Raymond smiled. "We did it. Together." And behind them, justice, once blind, now blinking awake, stood a little taller. The fallout began before the sun had risen. By the time Harold White entered the courthouse the next morning, a storm was already gathering. Reporters crowded the front steps, their microphones aimed like arrows. Words like tampering, coercion, and misconduct floated through the air like ash from a fire someone had tried too long to hide. Inside, Judge Eleanor Evans had returned, not as a quiet observer this time, but as a formal legal advisor brought in by the Ethics Board to oversee the emergency hearing. Her robe, pressed and solemn, carried the weight of decades. Her presence alone turned heads. In courtroom 3, silence fell as Eleanor took her seat beside Judge Dixon. Her eyes scanned the room, locking on Harold White like a hawk. She did not smile. "This hearing," Judge Dixon began, "has been called in response to credible allegations of prosecutorial misconduct involving Mr. Harold White in the case of the State versus Billy Joe." Harold stood. "I deny all allegations and maintain that my actions were within legal bounds." Eleanor's voice rang out, measured and piercing. "And yet we now have a sworn statement from a key witness who claims otherwise, as well as testimony indicating deliberate suppression of exculpatory evidence." Clara sat behind Raymond and Billy, her notebook open, fingers trembling only slightly. She had done everything she could. Now it was in the open. Raymond leaned in toward Billy. "This ain't just about clearing your name now. This is about showing folks what really happened." Billy nodded, eyes locked forward. White stepped to the front. "I admit there was pressure to resolve the case quickly. The town was restless. There had been a string of thefts, and I believed I was acting in the best interest of the public." "You believed," Eleanor repeated, "that cutting corners and targeting the innocent was acceptable." "I had reasonable suspicion," he argued. "Billy Joe fit the description. The clerk confirmed it." "Only after you cornered him," she replied. "And after you ignored evidence that contradicted your narrative." The courtroom was still. Even Judge Dixon said nothing. White tried again. "This town expects justice. That's what I was trying to deliver." Eleanor stood slowly. "This town deserves justice, not shortcuts." She turned to the bench. "Your Honor, I formally request that all documentation from this case be submitted to the State Bar for review, and that Mr. White be suspended from all prosecutorial duties effective immediately, pending investigation." Dixon hesitated, then gave a single nod. "So ordered." A wave of whispers swept across the room. Harold White opened his mouth, but no words came. His face reddened, jaw tight as bailiff stepped to his side. "You can't do this," he muttered, but no one answered. As he was escorted out of the room, he passed by Raymond and Billy. Their eyes met, not with anger, but something far heavier: accountability. Outside, the courthouse lawn was filled with neighbors, reporters, and people Raymond had never met. Some held signs, others phones, but all watched with reverence as the man once mocked for his boots and calloused hands now stood tall. A journalist approached with a microphone. "Mr. Joe, would you like to say something to the people of Willow Creek, or to the justice system?" Raymond looked at Billy, then at Clara, then finally at the camera. "I came here thinking I was alone. That my voice didn't matter," he said. "But a father's voice, when it's for the truth, it echoes louder than we think." He paused. "They tried to bury my boy with silence, but we spoke up, and now the truth's louder than the lie." He nodded once and walked away, leaving behind not just a scandal, but a legacy. A week after Harold White's removal, Willow Creek had changed. The town that once turned its head at a poor man in a courtroom now looked him in the eye. Headlines shifted from suspicion to celebration. Local papers ran titles like "A Farmer's Fight for Justice" and "Truth Wears Work Boots." But beyond the headlines, something deeper had begun to stir. Conversations in diners, in churches, in schools. The story of Raymond Joe and his son had opened wounds people hadn't realized they still carried. But for Raymond, the real shift came quietly. He and Billy had returned to the farm. The tractor needed repairs. Fences were still leaning. Life hadn't paused during the courtroom battles, yet the weight that had sat heavy on Raymond's chest for weeks had finally lifted. They stood together in the barn one morning, sunlight breaking through the old slats. "Feels different now," Billy said softly, running a hand over the worn wooden beam. "Like I can breathe again." Raymond nodded. "Sometimes truth don't fix everything, but it clears the air." They worked in silence for a while, but the peace didn't last. A knock came at the gate just after noon. Clara was there, her hair pulled back, a satchel over her shoulder. She carried papers, not court documents this time, but something else entirely. "I've been offered a position," she said, smiling. "Public Defender's office in Baton Rouge. Full-time." Billy blinked. "You're leaving?" Clara hesitated. "I didn't want to, not yet. But this case, it changed things. People saw what happened here." "They want me to be part of something bigger." Raymond nodded. "You earned it." She looked at him, her eyes suddenly wet. "I wouldn't have done any of it if you hadn't believed in me." Raymond shook his head. "No. You believed in me when no one else would." They embraced, firm and heartfelt. She handed Raymond a folder before stepping back. "What's this?" he asked. "It's a copy of the ethics complaint I filed, and a recommendation letter in for you." He frowned. "For what?" Clara smiled. "The county library board is looking to reopen. They want someone with experience, someone the town respects." Raymond looked stunned. "You think I could go back?" "I think they'd be lucky to have you." As she drove off down the dirt road, the dust rising behind her, Billy placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "Think you'll do it?" Raymond didn't answer right away. He watched the horizon. "Maybe. The field's not the only place I can plant seeds." That evening, the community gathered in the church hall for a town meeting. Something simple, nothing formal. Just people needing to share space after weeks of tension. Raymond hadn't planned on speaking, but when his name was called, the crowd clapped until he stood. He walked to the front, holding nothing in his hands. "No paper today," he said with a small smile. "No evidence to show, just my thanks." He paused. "I thought standing up would make me feel small, but turns out, when you stand up with truth, people listen. Not 'cause you got a suit, not 'cause you got fancy words, but 'cause truth is heavy. And when you carry it long enough, folks see your back ain't bent for nothing." A long silence followed. Then applause. Not polite, thunderous. Afterward, as people came to shake his hand, to hug Billy, to ask how they could help, Raymond looked around and saw something unfamiliar. Not pity, respect. As the night faded and the hall emptied, Raymond lingered by the door, eyes fixed on the stars above. The world was still imperfect, still unfair in places. But tonight, justice had been served not by power but by perseverance, not by wealth but by character. He took a deep breath, the air cleaner than it had felt in years. He was no longer the man they had once laughed at. He was the man who spoke and was heard. Weeks passed. The fields of Willow Creek began to bloom again, touched by early spring. The courthouse, once a symbol of fear for Raymond Joe, now stood as a quiet reminder of what had been overcome. Billy returned to his routines, repairing fences, tending animals, and sometimes just sitting in the barn with a book in hand. He smiled more, slept deeper, laughed like he used to. The scars of his arrest didn't vanish, but they faded with time, replaced by the firm knowledge that his father had never given up on him. Raymond, too, changed. He stood taller, walked lighter. The offer to return to the county library sat folded on the kitchen table. He hadn't said yes, not yet. But sometimes, late at night, he found himself flipping through old novels and remembering how words used to open worlds. Clara called from Baton Rouge once a week. Her voice still carried that same quiet fire. She was already defending her first case. She always ended their calls the same way. "You're the reason I'm here." And maybe she was right. Because when Raymond Joe, a man of few means but deep conviction, stood before the court, he did more than defend his son. He reminded a town what integrity looks like, what love sounds like, and what justice can feel like when someone ordinary refuses to stay silent. If this story moved you, share it. Let others know that courage isn't about titles, it's about heart. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to our channel for more stories that prove the quietest voices often carry the loudest truths.